is the DAWbench Radio Show, the official podcast of DAWbench.com.
Welcome to the DAWbench Radio Show. I'm your host, Curigliano of AAVIM Technology in Melbourne, Australia. And today I am joined by Pete Brown of Microsoft in Maryland in the United States of America. How you going, Pete?
Good. How are you doing, Vin?
Very good, man.
Thanks for having me on.
Not a problem at all. My pleasure. And this time you are a co-host, not a special guest, but, you know.
Special co-host, maybe.
There you go, special co-host. I would suggest that we are at polar opposites weather-wise. I would suspect because, you know, we're right in the middle of summer. We had 38 degrees yesterday, and you would be. Do you actually get snow?
Yeah.
Do you get snow where you are?
So 38 degrees in Yankee units is about 100 degrees, and
yes.
No, we tend not to get that hot here. I'm in this weird part of the country where every time somebody gets snow, we get rain or ice, but it's been pretty mild so far this year.
Right. So you're not blanketed in snow over there.
No, it's been getting below freezing every night, but no snow really so far. Right.
That's interesting. You know, I've got a friend in Nova Scotia that was sending me pictures of him shoveling his path and driveway. So,
well, that's Canada though. They're like, that's practically the North Pole.
So further north, yeah. Okay. Well, there you go. All right. Enough about the weather. We are into a new year, and so last year was, a little bit off the tip, so to speak, and but there was a lot of things that shifted the focus from music technology, but there was still quite a few things happening that got released, which was kind of quite good. Most of them kind of all shoveled in right towards the end of the year, but that's pretty understandable considering what was happening. So I just want to cover some of them, but real quickly, I do need to just mention DAWbench Suite 2020 didn't really eventuate into a public sphere. Now, I've already discussed that a few times of why. One, there wasn't a lot of testing going on.
Right.
And two, I did change a lot of the procedures in that test, and that threw up a couple of curves in Reaper. Now, I have discussed it a little bit, but there was an issue where the template was reserving enormous amounts of CPU resource at idle. Now, this is because of the large number of contact instances, and even if the instruments were offline and muted, Reaper was still Reaper was still reserving these resources. Now, I know we had discussed it. I never really got to the bottom of it, only because I didn't quite connect with Justin enough on that. But we did do some work on it. I found some parameters that behaved a lot better, and they've become now the default for the 2021 suite. Now, there's been a lot of work in the new suite as well where we were exhausting those earlier 16-bit 44.1 tests. Now, they've served us very, very well for the last 15 odd years, but what we decided to do, when I say we, that was myself and Pete, is that we needed to kind of redo the session so that we had a lot more headroom moving forward. And instead of just piling more polyphony and more plugins, we thought, well, hang on, why don't we start dealing with higher sample rates? So I've redone all of those test sessions. They're all 24-bit now for a start, but so nice. There's a 24-bit 44, 24-bit 48, and 24-bit 96. Now, the reason that's going to be really interesting is that, especially for the plugins, I think it's just going to scale depending on the sample rate. 44 and 48 is going to be almost identical. 96 is obviously going to place a lot higher resource on the sessions, which is good because then we don't have to sit there and run into 600 to 800 instances of a plugin, so to speak.
Right. Yeah.
Which is where we were heading. You know, it was kind of ridiculous. I have got a 640 plugin session. They have moved to 80 tracks and 640 instances, but that's really more for the 44.1 and the 48, not for the 96, obviously. I
640 instances of contact or?
No. Oh, no.
Okay.
Hang on. No, there's 640 instances of the RXC and the 1566, right? The plugins. Instances of contact, well, there's 9,600 notes. That's 480 instances of contact.
Jeez,
no,
wow.
480, sorry, plus 16, 496 instances of contact in that template. But anything above 3,200 nodes, so anything above the first 176 instances are actually offline, right? But then this is when we discovered that problem that it doesn't matter whether the instruments are offline, they were still, taking a huge resource on the CPU. But we haven't completely resolved it, but I've worked with Justin. We found some settings where the test parameters will work a lot better, and at idle, it's not taking the whole CPU. It's taking about 50%, still taking about 50% of the CPU on those larger core systems. But what tends to happen is that as you get into loading the session, that reserve resource has to be used before it starts incrementally going up again, which is fine, right? But when the thing was already pegged, we couldn't even run the session. So that was the thing that we resolved. So
is that something that Justin's going to share with the general Reaper users? Or?
No, no. That's a discussion. That's a discussion that's been ongoing with myself and Justin. There hasn't been any change. We're using the available parameters. And the significant change was in the threading behavior, which is interesting. It defaults to 4 on Windows. If you drop the threading behavior down to 3, that immediately halves the reserve resource. So again, I can't connect these dots yet because Justin hasn't connected the dots for me, right? But even dropping that to 3, and there wasn't, I don't think there was a measurable performance thing. So there was a little bit of a performance difference. So dropping it from 4 to 3 did drop the performance a bit. And then on an off chance, he just said, well, you want to try automatic, which is, in brackets under the Reaper menu, it says experimental. I've gone, how long's it been experimental? He said, probably about 10 years.
Yeah.
So, but the interesting thing was that setting, it halved the resource, right, which was perfect, and it also smoothed out the playback at the really low latencies. And I went, whatever you're doing with that automatic setting, it's working. Do we really need the other one? So this is the ongoing discussion. I think with Reaper, there's just too many options to fiddle with, right? And interestingly, also on OS X, the threading behavior setting is automatic. So so that was interesting. So look, I don't want to spend too much more time on DAWbench 2021. These sessions will become available publicly. I'm giving Pete some breathing space because, and this is Pete from Scan. Yeah, I'm giving Pete from Scan some more breathing space because he's going through some significant stuff, not only with DAW testing, because he hasn't even been able to get to it because he's dealing with Brexit, and he's still trying to connect the dots at that administration level with how they're actually going to be doing business. So the testing has taken a bit of a back seat. And the other problem is, and we can discuss this a little bit further on, is that the Ryzen 5000s they're unicorns. They're literally unicorns. If you can get one, you're very, very lucky, because here in Australia, we have got zero. I'm saying, when I say zero, there is zero availability of any of the Ryzen 5000s. It's pretty much the same in UK. Yeah. Pete can't get a hold of them to test them. So I've just said, take a breath, sort out your administration stuff and your business level stuff. This can wait. It's not overly important. This can wait. And once we finalize all the testing, then I'll drop them up so that everyone can have a bit of a play as well. But the tests, especially the VI test, is far more difficult to run not only because of the number of instruments, but you have to get a cadence going where you bring the instrument back online and then unmute it. And if you hold down a key accidentally at the wrong time, it unmutes all 960 instruments.
Geez,
And let me tell you, that caused some fun when that was accidental. Because I did it accidentally, Pete did it accidentally, and it just when you say the machines come to a grinding halt, the machines came to a grinding halt.
Yeah.
So okay.
So
sorry.
Vince, the new version of DAWbench, so it's you have different sample rates now than you had before.
Mm-hmm.
It sounds like it has more tracks and stuff. So it sounds like it's just a more modern version of what you'd been running for a while.
Yeah, I've just brought it.
Cool.
I've brought it into 2021.
Brought it up to speed here.
Yeah.
Nice.
Look, the other one served us very, very well. And interestingly, everyone's saying, well, why were you sticking with that 16-bit and at 44? Because I had a mathematical formula back there. Someone had popped the mathematical formula back up on the forum to create a sine wave that if you did it at a particular frequency at 44.1, when you compressed it, it almost compressed to zero. That was the main reasoning. That's why the sessions are tiny, When we moved them to 24-bit and 44, it didn't compress anywhere near as much because the mathematics wasn't there. And again, 4896. So these sessions are a lot bigger to download. They're not enormous, but they're not that 6 or 7 megabyte that they were in the past, right? So that was the main reasoning. But and we did really need to move into those other different sample rates because I think that's going to open up a few areas of discussion. And the reason being is that 48K, for example, widely used, film and TV, it's all 48K. I know for a fact that the core sample rates that the sample playback engines, the samples are 44.1. Anything above 44.1 is upsampled in real time. Now, how that actually behaves in regards to performance, that kind of varies. And I know Contact does it. I know VSL has done it. And I've navigated problems with both of those at anything above 44.1. So I can't go too far in depth with that at the moment, but that could be an interesting area because if my sessions, especially that Contact session, starts getting really weird at anything above 44.1, I think we've just tripped up that underlying issue of it having to basically upsample in real time, very, very quickly and a lot of stuff at the same time. So that'll be an area of discussion if it actually eventuates. If it doesn't, cool. If it does, you go. Another can of worms we can navigate around.
I'll be happy to try out the new version. For me, I was looking forward to seeing the higher sample rates because I normally run at 96.
Yep, correct,
24. Not because of quality or anything like that, but just stability with the Motu stuff I have that's best there.
Yes.
And going back down and changing all my settings to 44.1 or something like that was just a hot mess, so I didn't want to do that.
Yep. No, I was fully aware of that, and that's why I've kind of forwarded you some of the beta stuff so you can have a bit of a play.
Yep.
Clay, I thought of you, Pete. 96K. There you go. I think Pete will be happy.
I really appreciate that.
Well, there you go. All right. I think, look, that's enough for the DAWbench suite. One of the things that happened really late in the year that was directly related to DAWbench and the work that I've been doing is the audio interface low latency performance database is a bulk of my work now.
It's a huge service you provide to folks.
Yeah. Well, I mean, look, it's something that I started 10 years ago. I didn't realize what I was actually getting myself into, but it's something that I've maintained, and I actually enjoy doing it. I have to navigate some pigeon chess at times, which is kind of frustrating. But in the end, it's something that I enjoy maintaining it. So I get the new interfaces. I can do some comparative performance. It's informative not only for me, but it's helpful for a lot of people. And it's great, and there is a cumulative 10 years of work there. Do
you have 10 years worth of interfaces stacked up on a desk in your place?
No, I sold a lot of them off.
Oh, yeah, good. I was just imagining this massive pile of audio interfaces in your place.
I'll send you some photos of what I've got. There's a stack still here. There is a stack there. But I did do a cull. I did do a cull a couple of years ago.
Right.
But I had to. There was I'm staring at a wall of these interfaces. Some of them are 5 years old. They're out of warranty. They've only been used maybe maximum. I may have tested them twice. They weren't ones that I was using, but they were 5 years old. I'm thinking, I just put them on eBay and sold them. And so
used only by a little old man on Sundays, twice a year.
Well, literally. Yeah, well, some
never
of them,
gigged. Yeah,
some of them were literally tested once for the DAWbench comparative testing, and then they were parked.
Right.
So there is quite a few still here, but there was also a big bunch that I sold off. But I am a bit of a bowerbird, but I've been getting better, cleaning up stuff that is not necessarily of service anymore. So with the audio interface database, I've kind of been lucky because in the last 10 years that I've been doing this, the reference card, I think it shifted very, very early from the RME HDSPE AIO, which I had on hand, and that's what I started the testing on. And then I moved it to the RME AES and the ADI8QS. Now, that was a reference card. It's 2011, so it's not quite, we're going on to 10 years.
Yeah.
So I did that reference, and then everything is a comparative performance against that reference card.
Right.
So here we are in 2020, and I finally got a new reference card, and I just thought, I have to change every cross-referenced rating now to the new reference. And the new reference card, it's an RME card again, and I knew this was coming because the AIO HDSPE Pro is using the current ultra-low latency AD and DAs. When I say ultra-low latency, I think they're 5 to 7 samples.
Wow.
And the ADI8QS was running 12 to 14 samples. So I knew what I was going to be in for, because if the driver remained consistent. Now, here's another thing, all right? So that driver that I tested was 2011. Here we are in 2020. I fired up the RME, the latest RME driver with the ADIO Pro, and there is nearly, let's say there's 9 years between the two drivers, and I fired it up on the old X58 reference machine because that was the base reference. Do you know, the DSP, there was a little bit, I got about an extra couple of % out of the DSP. That might be just some, driver efficiency updates. But we're not talking a lot, but there was a tiny bit. With the sampler test, with the sample polyphony test, it was exactly the same. So we're talking driver architectures 9 years apart. There's a little bit of improvement on the DSP test. The sample was within, here we are 9 years later, it was breaking up at exactly the same. And I'm looking at the chart and I've gone, that's just hilarious. But that just also proves the consistency of what the guys are doing there. They've got that firmware and hardware. Sorry, they've got the firmware and the driver team, the two brothers that have been there since the late 90s. And the consistency was amazing. So here I was, new reference card. So that's what I did during the Christmas break. I fired up my Excel spreadsheets with all of the results and redid 50 plus interfaces for the database.
That's exciting holidays there for you.
Oh yeah, mate, I was living the dream, Pete. Let me tell you. But look, it was a good exercise because I realised that in some of the earlier stuff where I didn't have the Excel sheet, I stuffed up the rating, not by a lot, but just a little bit. So some of the interfaces actually changed position. So then what I did after that, because the actual chart with all the 50 plus interfaces has become so big as just a normal JPEG that it was dropping offline on where it's been displayed on the forum occasionally because it's outside of their parameters. So what I did is I cut it down to a top 20 for that one, and then you can actually download the full 50 plus on a PDF, which is a lot neater. And it's good, So now we move forward. We've got a new reference card, but it did take nearly 10 years to actually knock that RME, AES, and QS combination off the top spot, and it was just another RME card with near identical performance 10 years later, but just with better A to D and D to A. So there you go. So,
They do say, I don't own any RME stuff, but everything I've heard about them is they make great stuff with, great drivers, and their silicon that they're using is well optimized and everything. So I'm glad to see they're still up there.
Yeah, look, I mean, the most important thing for me was that, drivers 10 years apart and they're literally identical. So, and we kind of tend to see with some of the other manufacturers, sometimes there's some improvement, and then sometimes they completely fall off the turnip truck. I've had various instances of drivers from numerous manufacturers, and they'll go to a different driver revision, the whole thing just collapses, and I'm thinking, what have you guys done? And they've gone, oh, hang on, we've made a slight change, and then they'll revert it back. But look, I don't...
And a lot of them are using the same drivers and silicon as each other anyway, so the ability to kind of innovate there is pretty limited.
Well, I mean, they're using the oh god, I've forgotten the name of that third-party driver now. See, that's only because I want to forget it.
There's XMOS, Thesicon.
No, sorry, it's the XMOS as the firmware or hardware, and Thesicon as the driver is the most typical combination with these third-party USB interfaces. Now, in my summary of what's been happening in 2020, I actually I had a hit and home run, and then I had a hit and on base, and then I had a basically swing and miss, right? And the hit on home base I actually gave to Thesicon, believe it or not, because I did some testing on, I think it was the Apogee interface that was using these Thesicon drive. I wasn't expecting, too much, because it has been an absolute tug of war with those drivers for years for me. And they've actually improved them.
Nice.
Measurably. We could measure the improvement. They're not up around the RME level, obviously, but I can see
they're also not priced up there too. So
yeah, but I can actually see that there has been some improvement, and but there's still some whacked out settings there. They've got a safety buffer that you can actually switch off. Right, there's a thing you can switch off this safety buffer. And to get a lower latency, it actually, wait for this one, Pete, drops the latency below nominal, right? So if you've got the 32, if you've got 32 or 64 and the nominal is 0.7 or 1.4, it's actually below that. I'm going, well, that's going to be interesting. How's that going to work? Well, it didn't. It just completely collapsed. And I just thought, why is that button even there? So
there must be some reason, but that sounds bizarre on the face of it.
Well, because it, in the control panel and actually in the reported I/O, it drops the latency right down. It doesn't matter whether it's workable or not. It was completely it was completely unworkable.
Benchmark mode.
Yeah, well, I couldn't get anything out of it. And look, there's still another interface manufacturer that I think the drivers are quite reasonable, but their control panel settings are, I've mentioned it in the past, and I'm not going to name them again, where it's one level out, right? So the window dressing is one out. So what they claim is 16 is actually 32. What's 32 is actually 64. What's 64 is actually 128, and so on and so on. And it's pretty easy to spot when the 256 sample setting has a playback buffer above 12 milliseconds. I'm going, no, that's 512. And then I just went through the whole lot and went, oh, I know what they've done here. But again, that's just, you have to look at the actual measured and delivered latency, not what the control panel tells you, because some of them have actually no correlation. So that's that was a nice end of the year for me, because the AIO Pro I didn't receive until I think it was almost the start of December. I knew it was coming. Pleasantly surprised would be what I would say would be the overall summary, and the headphone outs are, just the sound of the headphone out, the improvement over the last one was, quite good. So it's a great little card, but it's the new reference. So there you go. So moving forward, and it'll be interesting if anything challenges it, because again, it took 10 years for the other one to get knocked off, and it was only knocked off by a card from the same manufacturer. So there you go.
What's interesting, Vin, is like you post these benchmarks with all the kind of the lowest latency devices and stuff out there, and yet I still see on the forums people like just going like crazy trying to get as much latency removed as possible, but they're not starting with a good card, right?
No.
They're just using some inexpensive USB audio interface or something like that, which really I think more people should be referring back to if they're really interested in ultra low latency, they should be referring back to the list that you're publishing here. Yeah.
And look, there's quite a range of interfaces in that. Actually, did I say top 10? I did a top 20. Sorry, I did a top 10.
Right.
I did a top 20. There's several manufacturers in that top 20. I mean, RME obviously prominent because that's just the way it is. But there's multiple interfaces in there. Some Motu stuff in there. There's Presonus. There's some UA stuff in there. There's some Antelope stuff in that top 20. So there are some good options out there. All of them have their caveats, but there are some good options. So there's really no excuse for people to go, race to the bottom and then expect some good results. You can get some good results, for example, from the Focusrite interfaces that are in that kind of lower to mid, and then go into some nicer prosumer and pro stuff. That driver is actually quite good. So there are some options there at various price points. You just got to be aware of what the use of, what your working environment is actually going to be requiring. If you're doing just some basic audio tracking, not much virtual instrument stuff, it's not really going to be that important. It's more when you start dealing with real playing with virtual instruments, just the overall feel under your hands when you're playing, and also guitar amp sims and that type of stuff.
Right.
And then at the other end, it's how far can you push these machines, even at the higher latencies, to the point where, where the stability starts interfering, So, and then there's another whole area where we're talking about how is that driver actually interacting with the hybrid playback engines, and off we go again. We've discussed it in the past, but we won't go into that one because we'll be there for a while.
So do you provide a link to that as part of the podcast here, or like where do people go to see that list?
I did a recent post on my Facebook page where you can find it. That list, I'm rebuilding the DAWbench webpage, so all of that stuff is going to be more centralized this year. But the thread and the discussion is over at Gearslide. It's easier to find. You just go to the computer section. It's actually pinned right at the top. So that's an easy one. But I do post up on Facebook at the moment, which is more of my direct contact now for the people following along. But I do promise there is a new DAWbench website coming. I just hadn't focused on it over the last couple of years. So it is coming.
Cool.
Now, rush of new releases for the DAW stuff, which is kind of, wasn't overly surprising because we knew a lot of this stuff was coming. And so it was always towards the end of the year. I remember one morning I was saying to you, hey, Pete, I reckon there's a new Cubase version about to land because they usually drop one around this time.
Right.
And we were on Messenger, and then I logged into the web and went, oh, here it is, Cubase 11. So I kind of, here I am thinking, hey, this has got to be dropping, and it actually dropped overnight while I while I was snoozing. So new releases.
Yeah, they're pretty consistent.
Yeah. So Cubase Nuendo 11, Studio 1.5, Ableton Live 11. Pro Tools had some releases really late as well, 2020, 11, and 12. And all of them brought some new bits and pieces to the table, which is kind of quite good for all the end users. There was quite a few people watching the Cubase release in respect to the reports that I'd done with the multimedia class scheduler issue with how they were managing that, with the thread limiting. And so a lot of people were watching that Cubase 11 release, and I got a couple of messages via email and also via the Facebook that said, hey, check this out. They've actually made a statement saying that they've improved, now I'm paraphrasing here, that they've improved the real-time performance of multi-threaded sessions.
Okay.
And I went, okay, I'm paraphrasing. But so they were saying that they'd improved the real-time performance when using multiple cores, right?
That sounds great.
Which is exactly what I was highlighting, Pete, because the real-time engine was dropping cores, right? They purposely did it, and to circumnavigate that multimedia class scheduler problem. And so I went, okay, that's great, sounds great. Fired up Cubase 11, fired up all of my reference tests, and went, nothing changed. Literally nothing has changed. Well, not on the reference stuff that I was doing. All the core threading behavior was identical. As soon as you dropped off ASIO guard, you'd get a number of logical cores halved -1, which was the same behavior, but also the same behavior of where the first thread was on a physical core, and then all the following ones were landing on the hyper-threaded core. So it was still as confusing as before. And I just posted up a quick thing saying, look, I've quickly tested Cubase 11. Move along. Nothing has really changed. I'm not sure what they were referring to. But look, in one of my clients who runs a large 10980 system, 10980XE, who does a lot of virtual instrument stuff, and I didn't have one on the bench at the time, so I just said, can you quickly just run these reference tests for me and tell me how it's behaving? Because the concern that I had was that there was reports coming from Steinberg about the thread rippers, that anything above the 16 cores were collapsing. Now, we already knew that in 10 and 10.5, but not to this extent, where what was happening is everything landed on one thread. Anything.
Oh, ouch. Yeah.
Right. And this is not, this is not a discovery I made. This is something that Steinberg actually reported straight up front. They just said, yep, we've got a problem with the thread ripper. Anything above 16 cores, everything's landing on the one core. And I actually had Leon cross-reference that for me, because he was sitting in front of one and said, yep, I can confirm everything's landing on one core, even with ASIO guard on. I went, what? Right. So there's some real problem there. And I was concerned that they had set a 32 ceiling that could affect the 109080XE, which has got 36, right?
Right.
They haven't, right? So so there's a concession there. So I don't know where the breakpoint is, right? So they're saying, okay, thread ripper above the 16. So if you go to 24, then all of a sudden you've got 48, right? And that thing is going to collapse on its ass. Everything's landing on one thread, even with ASIO guard on, which I can't even fathom how that happened or how that got through beta, but it did. I don't know where the ceiling is. It's definitely not 36. So I think they've made a concession there. So somewhere between 36 and 48, that whole engine, not only the real-time engine, even the ASIO, even running under ASIO guard, collapses to the point where everything just drops onto one core. So that's a significant miss on those guys. I can't comment any further because I don't have a thread ripper to test, but that one kind of stuck out a bit.
Now, I haven't tested it myself either, but I mean, the way processes are going, the core counts are the things that are starting to double on a somewhat regular basis at this point. So they have to sort that out.
Yeah, but you know what? And we're going to discuss this a little bit further. I think they're starting to hit ceilings. They're starting to hit, like, just can't keep shoving more cores in. I think we started hitting ceilings. So we'll discuss that a little bit further because that's a little bit further down.
Sure.
But with Studio One and Ableton Live and the Pro Tools stuff, I don't have a lot of detail of the additional features. You're a Studio One user. Was there a lot of stuff in?
Yeah.
Was there any standout stuff in 5?
I'm terrible for DAW features because I generally just follow the same pattern for how I use it, regardless of version, and I tend not to use a whole lot of the new stuff that comes out.
Right.
I stay up to date just so as a Windows guy, I want to make sure things are working fine and everything. But they've added stuff, but honestly, I haven't used any of the new things yet.
Right. Okay.
But Studio One 5 itself seems to work just as well as the previous version did. So that's generally my bar for how happy I am.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't go backwards.
Yep.
Yeah, as long as it doesn't go backwards, that's a good thing. Yeah, and there was some additional features on Pro Tools 2011, and now I think I've just got up too early and my brain's a little bit fuzzy, but there was some good stuff that they actually put into that release as well. Yeah. And that kind of coincided with that new interface, which is interesting in itself because it was Mac only, which is kind of strange for an Avid release. And it's because it uses help me out, Pete. It's that Ethernet protocol, not Dante. What's the other one?
AVB.
That's the one. Yeah, it's AVB. And AVB, and you could probably fill me in a little bit more here. AVB is not native on Windows where it is on OS X, and I think that's the thing that they're trying to circumnavigate. And I don't know what's actually happening there. I kind of do, but I can't talk too much, if you know what I mean.
Yeah.
So,
I mean, you can implement AVB on Windows, but it's not there out of the box.
Yeah.
It's one of those things we've discussed it internally, and there was a long discussion a couple of years ago about, do you go AVB or Dante? Like, we have one of the world's largest Dante installations on campus in one of the buildings that we have there. And so there are obviously lots of people who are in that camp versus AVB. And then I noticed even like, because I guess this was more like 4 years ago or so, like at NAMM, they had all the signs everywhere that said AVB spoken here or Dante spoken here. And it was like a really big thing that year. And then the year afterwards, nobody seemed to care. Yeah.
It was almost like VHS versus Beta there for a moment. Look, I've dabbled with some Dante powered stuff, and it has definitely improved from my first foray into it, let me tell you, because my first foray, I deer in the headlights, and I've just gone, what is this? Seriously, what is this?
Right.
Because I was looking at it from, low latency studio perspective. I wasn't looking at it live, and so again, it's what your focus is. But the Dante stuff is being pushed into those low latency studio environments as well now, and
it's great because just for the cable, the cable limitations you had before, like this is so much easier to wire up, and you don't have to keep it 3 meters max away or 2 meters max away from the computer and stuff. So it's super useful just for that. Yeah.
Look, I can see the benefit of it, especially for live installation stuff. Where MIDI was pretty much the king, and it's still widely used, the MIDI stuff. But I can see where the Dante stuff has definitely made some inroads there. I don't know enough about AVB, Pete. I just know it was the competing protocol. It doesn't need a DSP accelerator like the Dante setup.
Right. And it'll work over your standard Ethernet ports, but the big thing for performance is that somebody would have to do some driver work just like with any other audio stuff, to minimize the buffers in use, which the buffers for Ethernet are higher than you would use for real-time audio. So.
Yeah, and this is the thing where the Dante DSP card comes into play. And that was the thing that was confusing me at first, because the Dante DSP card looks like an Ethernet card to me, but it's not an Ethernet card. And so you have to run a switch, and you have to run a standard Ethernet plus the DSP card together to actually get your low latency performance. So again, it's just, to me, it seems a little bit cumbersome, especially if you're going to be using just a single audio interface in a studio environment. So if I'm trying to present this to my clients that are working in, those mission critical environments for high end virtual instrument use and all the rest of it, how do I present them to go, hey, a Dante interface might be a good idea, but you need to do this, and we need to run an additional network, and actually better to have two network cards plus the Dante DSP. So keep your other Ethernet separate for your normal internet and intranet, and then just have some dedicated Ethernet connections for your Dante, plus a switch for a single interface. I wouldn't be getting a lot of takers, Pete, I haven't got a lot of takers.
It's really only shows benefits when you have more of a distributed setup.
Yes.
For all the reasons you've already stated.
Yep. Yes. And look, and I do understand the benefit for those people with larger installations, whether it's post-production or whatever else. And then look, and I've read quite a bit of some of those installations and how they've integrated it all, and it's fine. I can see the benefit of it. I just haven't had a huge call for it, because the majority of my clients are still high-end workstation guys. Single use, single interface. So it hasn't really made an inroad there. So interesting. But it's I don't know enough about the other protocol to even comment just yet. But I think it will be one to watch if it makes any further inroad, especially on a Windows. So is there any particular reason why there was a problem with implementing it Windows natively?
No, there's no technical reason. It's just more of a prioritization where the number of people asking for it is small enough that the work isn't just worth doing for some of the teams right now. There are lots of other things that are much higher priority and higher impact than that.
Right. Okay.
Now, personally, I would like to see it happen, but you got to convince with numbers.
Yeah. And you know what that reminds me of? And this was another discussion that we were having towards the end of last year, was the Dolby Atmos.
Yeah.
Right? Dolby Atmos and the availability on Windows, because that got brought up by a couple of my clients that are composers that are working in film and TV, that are needing to deliver stuff to Netflix, for example, who have embraced the Atmos. So you need the capability. And then we were starting to look at some options of how to deliver that. Now, Nuendo 11 has actually got that native. So that has to be a licensing thing, obviously. And then I was looking at the other solutions for Windows, and there wasn't much. I mean, there was a standalone system that Dolby provided, but there was a plugin that they co-developed with Avid, which was Mac only. And I'm scratching my head going, why would they have done that? And then, I've presented that to you, and we've had some ongoing discussion on that, which we can't really go into at the moment. But that is an area that I do want to focus on this year, because I think it's going to become more important. And if Nuendo managed to do it, how hard is it for them to actually port it down to Cubase?
Yeah, I'm sure it's probably a licensing thing, like you said, or something where they, or an audience thing, if they're trying to get people to use Nuendo instead. But I like that approach of integrating it in with the DAW, as opposed to, frankly, some kind of more kludgy approach of having an external application that you're sort of rendering things to and stuff. That other approach is kind of strange.
Yeah, and even the plugin, I'm not sure how well integrated that is within Pro Tools. I'm sure some people can fill us in on that one.
Yeah, when I was looking at it, maybe it's perfectly fine, but it just sort of smelled a little kludgy to me.
Yeah.
And then the other choice, like you said, was the standalone server, which that feels to me like you've got a massive team of people working on the audio for this. And I don't know if that's normal in the industry or not.
Yeah. And look, and then I should mention that the other Windows application that has it native is DaVinci Resolve. Now, where that is really interesting is that, well, you've got a free version of DaVinci Resolve that hasn't got the Atmos, but the paid version, I haven't got it in front of me, but the paid version is actually cheaper than the Avid plugin. And you've got a whole audio and video workstation with the Atmos integration. So I can't see the licensing being that expensive, Pete.
Yeah. And what's important to me there is that it shows there are some solutions. I mean, I think we can get more vendors on board with this, but at least it is possible to do this stuff on Windows.
Yeah. Look, I think, and in hindsight, when I'm going, maybe we should see if we can get someone to develop a plugin. And I thought, I think it needs to be at the application level to be smoother. And that's what I watched some of the release videos of Nuendo 11 where they were showcasing that, and that just looked so good, so easy.
Yeah.
You're not trying to integrate a third-party plugin into the control room and all the routing and all the rest of it. So I think that's going to work. I haven't had a look at DaVinci Resolve yet, but I would say probably be a similar type of, it probably won't be as nice as Nuendo. I don't know. I should get a hold of that and see what they've actually delivered there. I might be still in beta.
Yep. And that's a huge feature plus for Nuendo. And if that gets popular there, I'm sure other DAWs will start looking at it as well.
Now, the interesting thing is that the people who are going to be using that obviously are in, most post, but, and there is a but, the composers that are working in film and television, it is equally as important for them, and the majority of them are using Cubase, not Nuendo. So it'll, even if they have it as a hidden feature that they can unlock, but I don't know. We'll see how that transpires. But that was an interesting area that popped up again. Right towards the end of the year, there's all this stuff firing at us.
I know.
So that was one that we had a discussion about, and we're going to have an ongoing discussion. And I'm going to be actually pooling some of my high-end composer clients and do a little bit of a poll to see how important it is and see if we can get, some leverage there.
That would be good data to have.
Yeah. So I'll put that out, and I'll just remind myself, I will put that out. I've got a few people in mind that I'm going to actually shoot this to, and then we'll just see what kind of a reaction we get to it. And then anything that I've got, I'll forward that to you, and then we can see if we can get something rolling a little bit on there. Now, the next one, Pete, we're going to move into computer architecture land. Now,
there we go.
There was that was some quite interesting dynamic happening last year. On the x86 front, Intel was still pretty much asleep at the wheel. AMD released, and I'm going to say paper released, Ryzen 5, Ryzen 5000, which we will cover a little bit next. But the one that I want to talk about first is ARM. Now, that's the thing that's kind of sending certain sectors of the audio community that are more aligned to, the fructose-flavored platform into an absolute frenzy, Pete. Now,
sure.
I've got a bit of background because I've got some knowledgeable friends that have been working with ARM, and I know the technical reasons of where the potential was and everything else. It's very, very clean. You're not dealing with all the x86 junk code and all the rest of it. So, the potential is always there. So then when Apple released, they're going to be transitioning to ARM completely in the next 2 years. Let's just say that's like the carpet got pulled out. Intel have been slapped in the head because they have been asleep at the wheel a little bit, and the power delivery stuff. And what was interesting for me is that was the trigger for the transition from the old Motorola's to Intel was the power envelope stuff, remember? And they couldn't stuff the larger CPUs into the laptops and all the rest of it. So that was the driving factor. And again,
And just overall performance was a big part of that. Yeah.
Yeah, overall performance as well. But I think the triggering factor was more about the thermal envelope. They just couldn't keep they couldn't get the performance and they couldn't keep the heat down. So we fast forward 15 years. Yeah, it's about 15 years.
Yeah.
And the trigger point hasn't been the performance. The trigger point has been the thermals. And so again, we've come full circle.
Or performance per watt is what you always hear about. So,
yes, performance per yeah. So performance per watt, but it is to do with the thermals. I mean, the laptops and even laptops that I offer. I mean, they've got incredible amount of power.
Right.
But they're not quiet.
Laptops have always been a massive compromise because you're really constraining the ability to remove that heat from the device.
Yeah, of course, and especially if you're going for a form factor that's more form over function. If you're going for that aesthetic thing, and that's something that the Apples have always been very focused on, is the aesthetic, and there's nothing wrong with that because they're beautiful pieces of technology. But the thermal side of them has always been, a huge question mark. I've got an XPS that, again, looks like a little MacBook Air. It's beautiful, very thin. I'm up to my second one because the first one, the motherboard thermal, right? And all I do is surf the internet, and this thing is freaking itself out with an i5, and I'm surfing the web. That is it. I wouldn't even attempt to do anything, stressful on it because the fan would just be losing its mind. So this is where they hit that wall, because the Apple laptops, they were trying to keep the noise levels down, which was basically then thermaling the CPUs, which was then throttling them. So they were going up and down like a buddy.
The MacBook Pro was like a jet engine. It would, throttle way down and everything like that. Yeah.
Even running as a jet engine, it was still throttling. Where look, the laptops I've been delivering over the last 12 to 18 months or 2 years. The core counts have been going up, the thermals have been going up, the chassis have not changed, and they've been getting progressively louder. But one thing that I can say is that the thermals stayed within spec. When I say stayed within spec, we're only talking 1 or 2 degrees, but they were howling at the end of it. And so clients are saying to me, "How quiet are these laptops?" I'm going, "You can't have the word laptop and quiet in the same sentence. You just can't,
And there are a lot of people, I'm going to sort of diverge a little bit here for a second, but there are a lot of people who go looking for a laptop first, and then you ask them how they're going to use it. It's like, well, it's going to be in my studio. Okay.
Yes,
are you ever going to gig with it? No. Well, why wouldn't you build a desktop instead of a laptop?
100%. Oh, I've had that discussion numerous times, and I've had clients that have come to me for a laptop, and after the discussion, they've bought a desktop, and they've been far happier. Because you can barely hear my desktops in the studio. I mean, when I say you can barely hear them, and they've got more power. And for the money that they were going to spend on the luxury of a laptop because of the portability, they got a far more powerful desktop.
And they could always add a laptop on later if they need something to gig every once in a while or to leave, right?
Yeah, of course. And look, that's a changing landscape as well, because with the 9 series desktop CPUs,
the i9s,
the i9s. Even look, I had desktop replacement laptops that were thicker than your usual aesthetic styled ones, but I had 9900Ks in those things, Pete. Right?
Yeah,
9900Ks, and within their thermal envelope. Were they quiet? Kidding, of course not. But I had clients that had larger desktop systems. They were traveling overseas for work or whatever else, and they needed something that would at least give them enough power to maybe not run the full session, but just to get some decent horsepower. So, 8-core, 5 gigahertz in a laptop. Yes, it was a bit noisy. It wasn't a bit noisy. It was noisy, but they could put that into their luggage, right? Fly out, do whatever the work, and they could actually get some decent work done. Right. But that series, when the 10 series came out, and this is something that, and we're leading into the Intel stuff, is that I think Intel made a mistake going to the 10 core because they're trying to shove a 10 core at that die shrink, right, into that package size. The thermals were just, they're very, very difficult to control. I mean, I can control them, but they're difficult enough to control on a desktop. We're talking dual tower CPU coolers with multiple fans, right? To keep them quiet and thermally in check. They tried to shove them into a desktop replacement laptop. I just took one look at it and laughed my head off. I'm going, what the hell is that? It was literally over 2 inches thick at some point. It was running a multiple power supply. And I've looked at it and went, what is that? And, chatting to Pete from Scan, who had one on the bench, I said, have you seen these new series of bare bones? Because we use the same bare bone manufacturer for the base of our laptops. And he says, yeah, I got one on the bench. I said, what are the thermals and the noise levels like? He says, don't even bother, Vin. She said, he goes, don't even bother. That will bounce back. They're just unusable in a studio environment.
If I had to guess, I'd say it's, Intel is looking at AMD as their competition instead of looking at Apple as their competition, So they're like, let's cram as many cores as possible.
Yes. But I think, back in the early 2000s, it was the megahertz war. Remember that? The megahertz war?
Yeah.
Well, now it's the core war. But I think it's kind of shifting the focus a little bit too much in that everyone's trying to jam these cores in there. AMD were very, very smart because they were using these little CCX modules. They were only needing to fab a 4-core or an 8-core in the bigger ones in the Threadrippers. We'll get to that in a sec, right? But they were using these they were just needing to fab and yield 4-core chiplets, and then they were sticking a couple of them on a core. So where Intel was still having to get yields on a monolithic design of a chip, whether it's 4, 8, 12, 16, 18, right?
Yeah.
So that would be far more difficult to actually get the die shrink down. So AMD, look, they hit the ball out of the park. That was a very clever design decision, and it took them 3 generations now that they've actually got all that intercore latency sorted out and all the rest of it. But there was some caveats. Those CCX modules could easily get flooded, and not easily, but they could get flooded, and that's when we were starting to see some real differences in the real time and real world performance on them. Now that's shifted on the Ryzen 5000, right? Because that is now running 8-core chiplets. I want to come back to that later because I reckon they've hit a ceiling with that. So let's just move back to ARM. Now I know both you and I have been trying to follow as best we can the discussions, and it's difficult, Pete. It's just so difficult.
It's new, and sorting the Geekbench benchmarks from real world performance and stuff has been a challenge over time. But Vin, I should let you know, like I think Apple did an amazing job on these, just performance wise from what I'm seeing. But there is a contingent as usual that thinks they're going to save the world with this, but we'll have to see how it scales up for kind of the beefier machines later.
Yeah, and look, I have got no qualm whatsoever with what Apple have done, and look, the potential's there, especially with their own applications. My not problem, but the reason I'm finding difficulty in actually making any sense out of the discussion is that there's too much emotion attached to it. You can't really get in there and have an objective discussion because you just get shouted down by these over emotional players. Some of them, I think, are actually shills. They're obvious. Well, to me, they're obviously shills because they've got way too much inside info, and they just kind of leak it out a little bit at a time, right? But trying to get a comparative performance against the Intels is near impossible. I mean, a Geekbench, I don't even want to go there. I mean, we got in. I think we both got into some.
There was a recent article. Sorry to cut you off, Vin.
It's okay.
But there was a recent article that explained why those single core benchmarks were not equivalent, which I thought was a really good read.
Yes, and we both read that and we went, but that's not going to make one iota of difference to the
No.
people who are just sitting there emotionally sprouting, and they'll keep carrying on about the Geekbench and all the rest of it. It is very, very difficult to get some comparative stuff. Now, I hadn't had any of the DAWbench stuff available, so and it's not really cross-platform. It kind of is cross-platform. Actually, no, the 1566 and the Contact is cross-platform. But how are we going to run them on M1? None of the stuff is native on M1. They're saying that, it doesn't really matter. You just use, what do they call it? Rosetta 2, whatever it is, right? There's new. Is that an abstraction layer? What is it? What is that?
It's kind of a I don't want to say translation layer. It kind of depends on how the application is installed. But yeah, think of it as just a way to run x86 code on the ARM processor,
right? And
on the M1 processor.
So is it? And it's similar in the way that the Windows ARM is implemented?
Yes and no.
Yes and no, right.
So
okay.
Rosetta is a really good implementation of that type of process, but there is a performance hit to using it. So like you wouldn't get a real number. Yeah, there's a performance hit, and also you can't mix and match. So you can't have a native M1 application loading x86/64 plugins and vice versa, right?
Yeah.
So there are some complexities there.
Yeah.
And I don't think Native Instruments has their stuff ready for it yet, if I remember correctly. So
no. And look, what would I be using? I could be using Reaper, could be using Cubase, could be using Studio One. None of that stuff is officially ready for it. So I'm just sitting back.
It'll get there.
It will. But then, we don't have any real reference here, because some of those comparative performance thing was so hysterical, right? And I'm just looking at this going, yeah, I'm not really sure about that.
So I think, Vin, looking at it, that Apple, like I said, has done a really good job on this, and it's proven itself for general computing tasks. I think that's not an issue. Because of some of the codecs and stuff they've put in there, people who do like video encoding and stuff see like huge performance increases as well, which I think is pretty amazing.
Only on some video, because I've had a very in-depth discussion with a close friend of mine who actually has one of those M1s, and he is an audio professional, but he has worked in video production for decades, and I've just said, right, give me the skinny, because this is a person that is, I can have a discussion, remove all the emotion, go, right, you don't particularly care about the emotional side of this, right? You use OS X, for example, for your video editing because you went back to Final Cut Pro, right? So you ditched whatever you were using. He went from Final Cut Pro back to Adobe and then went back, right? So he uses Final Cut Pro for that. For the audio stuff, he's all over the Windows, right? So he was perfect for me. I'm going to say, remove all the emotion, just tell me what's going on with this M1 as far as your video. And he was conversing. Well, he said to me that there are certain areas, and especially the ones that Apple were nicely showing in those benchmarks, that it was performing great, except when you tried to do some other processing with rendering that was outside of that particular envelope, the thing completely collapsed. I've gone, so can you actually use that to replace your current Mac Pros? He said, no, simply no, right? So, and so that brought up, well, where's this thing going to be going? They're going to have to replace the Mac Pro at some point. And all he said to me, he goes, I'm already about to invest in a current Mac Pro just simply for the fact that I don't know what's going to be happening. And he's not overly confident that thing is going to be, they're going to be hitting the ball out of the park with the workstation class stuff. So,
and what's important is it highlights that, and this is across the board, x86 and stuff as well. You can't take a benchmark for one specific task, and then if you chose X% improvement for that, you can't then just blanket that across every other thing. You can't say that the processor is X% faster for everything because it encodes video X% faster.
Yeah.
And that's where getting things like DAWbench going on that are going to be super important, because I don't necessarily buy in that some of the huge performance increases we're seeing in certain areas are going to directly apply to audio.
No. And look, that was another reason why DAWbench isn't overly popular in some of the review circles, because it wasn't following a preferred narrative. Let's just leave it at that, right? It wasn't following a preferred narrative. It was showing some performance gaps that they had. And so that's why it wasn't overly popular outside of our immediate little circle, and that's fine. I'm not going to compromise or change anything. I'm just going to knuckle down and we can continue with the process and the procedures and improve them where we can and expand them where we can. And we'll just report however the chips fall on that, which will be, interesting moving
but don't
forward.
get me wrong. Yeah, don't get me wrong, Vin. I really do think that they've done a great job with this. So I don't want anybody to think I would trash Apple over something like this when it was probably the right thing for them. And we'll see, like a couple generations from now, if Intel and AMD and folks don't kind of get on the ball, Apple might be wiping the floor with them.
Yeah. Oh, no. Well, that's the prediction from certain friends of mine, but I'm not convinced.
Yeah, but I don't think it's tomorrow. I think it's a little more time than next month.
But that's on the premise that Intel and AMD are sitting on their hands and they've peaked. I don't think
exactly.
I don't think they have. And I don't think anyone can actually accuse you of being negative towards this in any way. I mean, we do get some pushback on some of those Apple threads, but that's because they see us as outsiders. It's kind of a bit ridiculous, and they won't read what is actually being said. They'll just go, nah, you're not one of us, so you must be trying to find some leverage to put a negative spin on that. So in the end, you can't really have an objective conversation. That's what I found anyway. And I downloaded that PreSonus test that was supposed to show the M1 just obliterating x86 stuff, and I attempted to run this. I attempted to run this test. There was no detail on where the hybrid engine settings were, what buffer setting it was set at. But the thing is that even on my 10700 dev machine, which is only an 8-core, runs at about 4.6, 4.7, somewhere around there. I was getting a result, double of what they were saying they were getting on the Intel stuff. So I just thought, I have no idea. I have no idea how to even present this. I'm not going to present the data because the test to me wasn't showing anything because we were missing a whole stack of parameter information. So we just have to wait. I have had some discussion with that friend of mine with the M1 saying, okay, what's happening on the audio stuff? He just started laughing. He goes, it ain't working, mate. I'm going, no, they're saying that it is working, all right? This is with Studio One, all right? He goes, it ain't working, Vin. That's all he said. He goes, take it from me, it doesn't work. Once you try and do anything with it, it falls over. I've gone, that's all I needed. Thank you very much, right? So that was interesting. Now, just real quickly, we'll move on to Intel and AMD. So the AMD Ryzen 5000s, now this is a point that I wanted to make earlier. They have made some significant changes there. One, IPC has been improved because they're just shooting for that single thread performance thing for the gamers, right? And it's important. It's important for various aspects of the audio stuff as well, especially the low latency, real time playing of the virtual instruments. But their focus is on that. It's the gigahertz war. It used to be megahertz war. Now it's the gigahertz war, right? So they're going for these really high clocks. They're going for the instruction per clock improvements. And where a lot of that has come about, in my opinion, is they've changed from the 4-core CCX to the 8-core, so that it's going to be less intercore latency because communication via, what do they call it, affinity fabric or whatever it is. So there's less. There's 4 less jumps, put it that way, right? So the CCX flooding that we were seeing, I think, is going to be improved. and they've managed to get that clock speed up. I don't know what the thermals are like on these. Who really knows, right? Because there's not enough of them out in the wild. Sorry, it's not that who really knows. People who've got them know, but I haven't been in front of one, and anyone that I can trust to report back hasn't been in front of one yet, just to see what the comparative stuff's going to flesh out to be. I know that there is some measurable performance improvements on the DAWbench stuff across both the DSP and the virtual instrument stuff, which will make some people happy. But I just, not as a negative, but I just watching and reading in between the lines, I think they've peaked. And the reason I think that they've peaked is that there is no yield. You can't get these things. So they've gone and cannibalized. So the four chiplets are gone. They're all onto that 8, right? Yep. And so they're cannibalizing those 8 chiplets from the Threadrippers, right? And you can't get them. They have completely disappeared, right? So I think that they've got a yield problem that they're not really talking about. And I mean, it's pretty obvious. You can't get them, right? They're unicorns across the planet, and you can sit there and brag about your IPC improvements and all of the rest of it. But if you can't get them, but if you can't get them, what's the point, right? So, how quickly they resolve that is where I'm going to put my final comment on that one, right? So at the moment, unicorns. So the more things you put on a die, especially at smaller kind of processes, then typically the lower your yield, and something like this is going to be really difficult for them to scale up at the same rate they were doing with the 4. With the 4s, correct. And that's exactly my point. And this is what the difficulty is with Intel. So Intel did get complacent. Let's call a spade. They got complacent, but they also the other thing that people need to realize is that when we're talking 14 nano and 10 nano versus 7 nano, for example, right? And this is from my understanding that the Intel 10 nano is closer to the TSMC 7. Right.
Yeah. And I think people get so hung up on that. It drives me nuts. It reminds me of kind of the through hole versus SMD stuff for synthesizers and whatnot. Most people should not care about what process is used to make the chip. They should care about what the result is.
Yeah. And this is leading into my point, right? So I've always said, look, if you can maintain the thermal integrity of the chip, the thermal stuff doesn't really matter. I mean, if you're going to just sit there and measure how much power you're pulling out of your walls, I think you've got a bigger problem than how much power the CPU is actually pulling, right? So for me, it's always been thermal integrity. If you can maintain a thermal integrity, I couldn't care less what die it's sitting on, right? Yeah, so I can maintain the thermal integrity right up to the 18 cores without it, with very minimal issue, actually no issue, right? And the machines run near silent. That's all that's important to me. I don't care whether it's a 14, 10, 7. I don't care, right? As
long desktop machines.
Yes, as long as the performance is there, right? So while everyone's getting all hysterical about the Ryzen 3 and 5000s and the single core performance and all the rest of it, which is all very, very good. They're back in the game. Not only are they back in the game, they're ahead of the game now, right?
Yep.
But people need to understand this. They've only just caught up. That's all they've done, right? They're not sitting there smacking Intel out of the park. Nowhere near smacking Intel out of the park. Core for core, IPC, all the rest of it. They've caught up. They've just basically edged in front, right?
Yeah, it's a bit of leapfrog.
Yeah, and we're dealing with Intel that have been basically asleep at the wheel for 2 years, right? So they've allowed them to catch up. So I've always watch the long game. I'm going, okay, I know that Intel are best when their back's up against the wall. And man, their back's been up against the wall, right? Because they've been getting better about this 14 nano, this and all the rest of it. So we're thinking, okay, where's this new architecture? This is the important thing, because they're basically been recycling the same architecture with some incremental improvements for a long time now. So the new architecture, I can't even remember what it's called. Let's just call it 11th gen, because I'm over all the lakes, Rocket Lakes, Snake Lake, who knows, right? I'm kind of over all of that. So let's just call it 11th gen, because that's very, very clear and distinct, right? So some of the 11th gen is already starting to sneak into the laptop things, but they're a true 10 nano, right?
Yeah.
Here's the interesting thing. I think it's called Rocket Lake. The next one, I think it's Rocket Lake. So 11th gen desktop. I thought they're miles away. Nope. They're going to sneak one out next 3 months, right? So 11900 is the one that has been kind of leaking out. Some details have been leaking out. Now, here's the interesting thing, right? One, how many cores do you think it's got, Pete? So you got 9900, it's 8. 10900 is 10. How many cores do you think the 11900 is going to have, Pete?
12? 16?
Wrong. How many cores? 8.
8. Yeah.
Right? And wait for this one. 11700, 8. Right?
Yeah.
And I've gone. And so there's a 11900K, 11900, and then a 10700K and a 10700. All of them are 8 cores. All of them are within a couple hundred megahertz of each other. I've gone, if that's correct, I think someone over there needs to be sacked, right? But here's the point.
It's all incremental, yeah.
Yep. Here's the point I wanted to make, right? Because that's going to be a nightmare for me to actually try and market these SKUs if they're all 8 cores. I'm thinking, what the? And one's an i7, one's an i9, and the only difference is 200 megahertz. That's it.
Yeah.
Unless there's some extra PCIe lanes, which I don't think there is, right? So they've gone back. Right, so what they've done is they've backported, this is the important part, they've backported the Rocket Lake architecture, which is the new arch that's been sitting there for the last 18 months, right, back into the 14 nano, right? I don't think they're getting a thermal envelope because this architecture is, wait for this one, 25% IPC improvement. We're not talking 10%, 7%, it's not 25%. So they've been sitting on this architecture that has got a 25% execution improvement for the last 18 months, and they just couldn't get this bloody thing out, right? So that's going to come out, and what I'm keeping a close eye on is not that socket 1200 area, because as popular as it is, and it's very, very good for some audio stuff, them going back to 8 is going to be an interesting marketing spin. I still don't know how I'm going to market that one, but
especially
I think,
with everybody else talking about how important multiple cores are.
Yes, correct. So, but I personally, I think that's where it should have been. They should have stayed at 8. They really should have stayed at 8, right? And then anything above 8 moved to X299. Now, a lot of people have written off X299, which makes me chuckle because I sell a stack of them, and I still do into these professional mission critical environment stuff. And so, up to 18 cores. Now, and
that has a lot more PCIe lanes as well, doesn't it?
Yeah, so it's more than cores. It's the massive number of PCIe lanes. So if you want to sit there and throw in a whole stack of, CPU storage, NVMe, expansion cards, additional graphics, there's a stack of PCIe. You're not worrying whether your USB stacked on top of something else, right? There is a stack.
That's what's been killing me with the recent few generations.
Yes.
On the consumer side of things, they have it's like 24 lanes or something like that. It's something pretty small.
Well, there's 16 on the CPU, and then I can't remember there is some extra additional on it. But I mean, a stack of those are already taken by all the USB ports and the USB 2 and 3 ports, and they're taken by the sound card, and they're taken by the SATA and all the rest of it, So
if you have a video card and an NVMe drive or something like that, you're basically full at that point.
If you have an external one, yeah. Oh, yeah. If you have an external,
not an external one, but a like my son's got an X16 video card in his PC, and that's what I meant by external, as in as an additional video card on top of the the internal graphics, right? Yeah, so you use up that 16 lanes. So we can use that 16 lanes, for example, on these socket 1200 machines that use the internal graphics, and then we've got at least that those PCIe slots are clear. Away from everything else. Yeah. So, but if you use an additional dedicated graphics card, dedicated was the word, not external. There you go.
Then you're chewing up. You haven't got much left there. So the interesting thing that I've been watching, and because I heard some rumors of the X299, which needs a refresh, and the refresh was supposed to be coming last October. And I knew it wasn't a motherboard refresh, so the X299 lived on as a chipset, but there was going to be a CPU refresh. And I went, well, what are they going to be refreshing? Right? So,
Right.
Look, I can only guess because I haven't heard anything confirmation, but you would think that if they've backported that Rocket Lake new architecture into the 11th gen in Socket 1200, if they did that with X299 with a 25% IPC,
That'd be pretty nice.
Yeah, even if they dropped it back to 16 cores, the Ryzen 5000 would have been dead on arrival, right? So this is all a timing thing, and it'll be interesting to watch. I still don't know what's going on there. They've been very, very hush-hush about that. I think they're playing to the crowd a little bit. You know, what's that CPU that has got the big and little cores? What was that one?
I can't think of the name of it, but it was their answer to ARM and mobile.
Right. Yeah. Shit. Okay.
There are a couple of laptops out there with it, but yeah, I don't know. Not my favorite Intel chip.
No. You know, the big and little, that is, you know, obviously aimed at that ARM market. I would just seed it. Look, I think they'll do okay, but I don't think
okay for some uses, not useful at all for audio. I would
think. Not for performance stuff. But I mean, again, the majority of laptops and netbooks, I mean, they just basically used for word processing and internet, and you know, if you're having to carry the thing around, and the battery power is important. So this is, you know, they need to at least keep their toe in the game. And same with AMD, they need to keep their toe.
But they can do better. Like, they can do much better than that design, which the thing Intel keeps doing is, hey, we've got this tech for this other chip over here. Can we slice off part of it and put it over here?
Let's shoehorn it over there. Yeah. But that just smacks desperation. They're desperate at the moment. You know, they're not winning, and they're not they're not leading for a change. So
my hope, my biggest hope, besides the fact that, again, it's great for Apple users to have the M1, I'm hoping that lights a fire under Intel.
Oh, it's got to,
because
it has to, and AMD. But again, I've got this reading in between the lines that I reckon AMD have peaked. Right, that 8-core chiplet. That's it. They're not going to shove any more into it, and they can refine it and all the rest of it. But I think that the crazy core rush, I think, is pretty much not over, but it's going to slow. I've just got to see what.
I don't know. Hard to predict the future.
Yeah, I've just got to see what Intel do. Who knows? They might sit there and go, oh yeah, you can't beat them, join them. Let's make some chiplets and stick a couple together. They might. I don't think so, but you know, that could be one way. Anyway, interesting to watch. So we'll just see what eventuates in 2021. I'm expecting that X299 refresh this quarter, because they do need to do something in that HEDT space. The Threadrippers for audio, oh man, that is a complete mixed bag, especially with what happened with Cubase 11, and I'm not seeing any warm and fuzzies coming from any of the other DAWs. So I think there is, you know, we are hitting some limits there that haven't been navigated as yet. So again, interesting to watch. Now, this is an area this is your area, Pete. MIDI 2.
Oh yeah, yep.
MIDI 2. Now, we've discussed it a few times in the previous podcast. I can't remember whether I discussed it with you at all on that.
I don't think I was on. Like, I don't think we really talked about it last time.
No, but we have discussed it a few times. I remember I did bring it up with Leon real early on last year, and then I chatted again on a later show. So, can you look? Seeing this is your bag. So, can you tell everyone what your actual involvement is, because it's, you know, you are right up there with the heavy involvement, not only at Microsoft, but also with the board with MIDI 2. So can you give us an overview of what you're doing there?
Yeah, sure. Happy to. Thanks. So I've been Microsoft's rep to the MIDI organization, which is, a standards body. They define all the standards for what makes MIDI MIDI, and they also do some marketing around it and trademark protection and all that kind of stuff too. But I've been their voting rep for, I don't know, 5 years or something like that.
Mm-hmm.
And then just before the holidays, I was elected to the MIDI organization's executive board. So I can't say 100% what that'll entail. It's a lot of legwork in terms of helping to define what the organization does.
Right.
And then there are also like little standards breakout groups, and some of those I'm involved with, and some of those not so much. But it's like the org has been moving along quite a bit. Like once everybody kind of agreed on the approach for MIDI 2.0 and set aside the work that was being done for literally a decade before that to define kind of an Uber protocol for everything. Once everybody aligned behind MIDI 2.0, stuff moved very quickly. And so last year, like we usually meet at NAMM, but this year it's online and virtual.
Well, there's a virtual NAMM, yes. It just started today too.
Sort of.
Started today.
Yeah.
Yep.
So there's some meetings for that were helping to define some of the upcoming features of it. But MIDI 2.0 itself was ratified, I think it was at last NAMM last year. So the standard has been accepted. In the meantime, there's been a USB MIDI 2.0 driver specification put out that the OS vendors need to work on. So that's something that we need to implement in Windows, and Apple needs to implement in Mac OS, et cetera. And then, so I know a lot of folks are like, well, what the heck? Why would I care about MIDI 2.0? What's wrong with the protocol from 1982? That stuff. And it's more about just more better stuff, right? So it's the increasing controller resolution so that you can do a lot more with even basic things like, say, pitch bends or continuous controllers or something, where some of those things were limited to 127 steps, or if you use the extended stuff is 4,096 or whatever steps on there, for which today sounded pretty steppy. Like you can, a lot of times you can hear that unless the software does some smoothing over it.
Yep. So the original one was 7-bit. I mean, we've had yes. So the original one was 7-bit. So the new one is 32. 64.
So it depends. There are various lengths of packets and different definitions for the different controllers. So
right.
A lot of them are floating point, which gives you an implementation of floating point, which gives you much finer grained control over it. But it's not just that. Like MIDI 1.0, there are 127 notes that you can hit, whereas MIDI 2.0, you can talk about frequencies instead of notes. So you can do, micro tuning and a lot of the more fine grained stuff that you couldn't do before.
Mm-hmm.
And then it's faster. It's not limited to, the serial processing from 1982, like the original one was.
Yep.
This is initially all over USB. It's bi-directional, so you can ask a device like what it does, how it wants to work, like what speed you're gonna use, and even things which I think is really exciting. You can ask it for like, hey, what would your configuration UI look like, so that you could have a discoverable UI that's actually stored in the device that is just rendered out on the computer, so you can modify all the settings for, say, a synthesizer or something like that if you want to. And then I think probably the most important thing is it's backwards compatible. So like all the existing MIDI 1.0 stuff will work just like it does today, even if the PC is using MIDI 2.0 to kind of wrap some of those messages go in there.
Okay, so that was one of the key questions, was the backwards compatibility. Now, how is that actually implemented? Because I did have that discussion with Aaron and Chris in one of the past podcasts, and we were going, I'm not quite sure. There has to be some interface that does a translation. Yep. So how is that done?
So there's there are a couple of different ways to do it. First of all, there's like if you have a connection to a MIDI device, use something called MIDI capability inquiry, which queries the device and asks if it supports, say, MIDI 2.0. And if it doesn't get a response back from that, it's just a sysx message. If it doesn't get a response back from that, it will drop down to MIDI 1.0 and just talk to it like it always has.
Yeah,
right?
As normal. Yep.
Yeah. And now if you have a device, there's also things like if you have a device where 4 of the ports are going to support MIDI 2.0 and 4 support MIDI 1.0, there are structures in place as part of this kind of universal packet stuff to be able to wrap messages going to the device and then have the device decide, all right, I'm going to just do, standard 7-bit MIDI messages over these 2 ports, and then I'm going to do the more robust stuff over these ports.
Okay. Now, the other question is the actual connectivity, because, if you've got the old MIDI 1 analog synthesizer sitting there, you've got the old 5-pin, no, it's not 5-pin, I can't remember.
5-pin DIN.
It is a 5-pin. So you got the 5-pin DIN. I think I read that MIDI 2 is Ethernet. Is that correct or not?
So MIDI 2.0, first of all, the specification specifically does not talk about what the transport should be, but there's a separate spec that talks about the transport.
Right.
And so the initial transport is USB, because you need this bidirectional communication with the device. Ethernet is likely to be the next one, if I had to guess.
Yep.
And then there is some talk about like, hey, should we investigate if it's at all possible to do higher speed MIDI 2.0 over DIN with devices, right? So that's something that's being investigated.
Well, if it's only USB, Pete, so I'm just kind of being, the devil in the details for me, right?
Yep.
So you've got a whole stack of external hardware synthesizers that are MIDI 2.
Yep.
Right? Do they all have to be connected via USB? This is my question.
Yeah, for the initial one, yes, if they are MIDI 2 devices.
Wow. Okay, so that means we're going to be dealing with USB hubs.
Yeah, and so I do with USB hubs today. Just
yes,
with
I know.
All the
yes,
devices I have.
Yes, we had that discussion last time. Yes.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. But yes, at least initially you'll need to. I'm super keen on seeing the Ethernet type stuff come through at some point in the future for all the reasons I talked about before.
Yep.
So I don't have to have as many USB interfaces around here as I do.
Yep.
But then to be clear again, like if you have a USB MIDI interface that surfaces, 8 ins and 8 outs over DIN, that'll still work just fine.
Right. Okay. All right. Awesome. So we will be seeing MIDI interfaces that have MIDI 2 and MIDI 1 together in the same interface. Do you actually see that or not?
We may have interfaces that do translation, say from MIDI 2.0 to things like MPE, the polyphonic expression stuff, or anything like that. But I mean, realistically right now, I think what we're going to see the most of is USB connected synthesizers and controllers and workstations that understand MIDI 2.0 inside that device and directly talk MIDI 2.0 to the PC.
And that'll be, that'll be the easiest connection. But I'm just seeing a wrangle of USB cabling heading into a machine.
It happens. It's honestly, it's no different than today, really. It's a little different. So instead of having an octopus hanging off of a single USB port, you'll have them directly connected to the hub. So it's a different kind of octopus. Yeah.
And look, and the whole thing with USB hubs, and I'm always been very hesitant there because the dots are always shifting. And I like even this week I had a couple of clients saying, "Do you have any recommendation for some good USB hubs?" And I said, "No." Literally no, because it is a shifting market all the time. I may have found some USB hubs that tended to work fine with anything pretty much except for an audio interface, for example. I never like putting audio interfaces on those. And then they disappear off the market and you get a replacement one and then, it doesn't see your eye lock or, it's just it's just bizarre. So that is an area that I've always been very hesitant about. And that's my concern is that if we're dealing with a whole stack of additional devices getting connected via USB, that we need some reliable hub solutions.
And reliable hubs are not inexpensive.
Well,
the ones that I
just
use
finding
here
them. It's just,
they're out there.
Yeah, but how long do they stay in the market? This is my problem, right? So I could come back 6 months later and the thing is gone.
So what I found is the ones that I use, which you would be hard pressed to justify to a customer, I think, they're industrial hubs.
Yes,
so they stay around for a very long time because they need industry support.
Yep.
And they're not USB 4 or any of the new stuff. They're not USB-C connected or anything. They're USB 3, and they cost, I think, $400 a piece or something like that, US.
And how many ports are we talking? Yeah, 400 US.
16.
Yeah, okay.
Yeah,
but,
there are like 16 ports, and I cracked them open to look at how they're designed, and actually really good design.
Oh, I can imagine. How many people are going to be investing in that though? That's
exactly.
going to be the question,
exactly.
right?
If you go to Amazon and get a $29 USB hub, I wouldn't connect necessarily all your critical audio equipment.
No, absolute crapshoot. And this is what I've been finding. Unfortunately, I think you and I are going to have a further discussion on some of those industrial hubs so that I can actually see if I can track some down or some variants.
So I'm putting together this, and it'll probably be up by the time this is posted, but this sort of unofficial Windows tweak / build guide, of which I'm sure we can have some animated discussion about at some point. Mm-hmm. That one of the things I do mention is which hub I use. Like I don't want to recommend a specific hub to people just because where I work, that gets hairy. But I will at least share with that information for which one I use.
Yeah. Okay. Yeah, that's not a problem. Awesome. All right. Now, one thing I did want to have a quick chat about, and this is, pretty relevant with the rise in people staying home last year and the additional loads across the cloud delivery and all the rest of it. And so this is something that I have discussed in the past. And look, in general, there was a pretty good experience across some of those ones that I used to have some qualms about. Native Instruments, for example, and I think it's we had this discussion in the past where I think it's a regional thing where here in Australia sometimes we get amazing download speed and then all of a sudden it just stops and trickles and so
right.
I could download I can download a full complete Ultimate sometimes in an afternoon, sometimes it takes 2-3 days, and it's just an absolute. Wow. Yeah. So that I think that is a regional thing because chatting to people overseas, they don't know what I'm talking about. But
it's true. When I was in Melbourne to do an event, like our bandwidth was horrible, and they said, "No, that's just how it is here."
Yeah, but and then again, I get my full 100 megabit a second. Now, don't laugh, but that's all I've got, right?
So what we had, Vin, what we had is we were doing an event, and the marketing team.
I hooked up with you.
Did you that day.
Right, we had lunch that trip. Remember?
Right. Yeah. But did I tell you what happened in that event?
No.
So the marketing team wanted to do a lab for all 100 people that were in the room, and what they did is they provided them images that they can use for the lab. But they forgot to disable updates, and the image was a few months old at that point. So
all right.
100 people in the room on Wi-Fi, and then on this really slow, but the best that we could get internet connection, suddenly all had to do
Windows
10 updates all at once, all at the same time during the event.
Classic.
It was not a great experience.
Could you hear a pin drop in the room or what? Oh,
yeah,
boy.
Pretty much.
Yeah,
it was messy.
And you know how I feel about Windows updates in general.
Yeah. We won't go there, but it was still amusing.
But that was that's pretty much the only time we've met face to face. Now that was quite a few years ago, man.
It was probably 4 or 5 years ago, I think.
Nah, I think it was more.
Really? Okay.
Yeah, it may have been. Anyway, but yes, I do remember that trip, and no, but you didn't tell me that, probably because I would have been laughing my head off at lunchtime, and you probably
I don't need to give you more ammo.
You didn't want to give me any more ammo and get any more abuse. Okay, well that's interesting. So look, in general, that whole delivery thing, considering the additional load across that whole web network was not too bad. I mean, Steinberg with the C11 rollout was not good. You know, they had a new Steinberg download assistant that they didn't really define that. That's the only way you can really install the application without any grief, because it was, if you downloaded all of them manually and tried to install Cubase on its own, it was missing a core facility that was not part of the application, but was installed with the new download manager. Now, they didn't actually tell us that. So, but they had some problems with C11, and there was server overloads, and people were losing their licenses when they were trying to update. So that was not as smooth as some, but the majority of the stuff was not too bad. The only other point I want to make is there's a magical driver install from Roland that I have had this discussion with you that I still can't work out what they're doing there, Pete. How many times...
I was so surprised when you pointed that out. Like, go ahead and talk about it.
And if people are not aware, as of Windows 10, so if Windows 7, Roland always had their bespoke drivers, right? So it doesn't matter whether it's an interface or their little controller keyboards, everything else. And you had a bespoke driver, and you go to your driver download page, and you go download driver, and you install the driver. It's fine, not a problem, right? Along comes Windows 10, and you go, okay, driver download, and you download it, and all you get is a PDF with the instruction that says, connect your computer to the internet, the driver will magically install. Well, it doesn't say magically,
right.
But, and I've gone, well, how?
And we wanted them to have that automatic install. I just didn't realize they were going to replace all of their drivers with PDFs that say, let Windows Update do it.
Well, that was one of the questions I first asked you was, is that driver part of the Windows Update? And I think the initial thing said was, you don't think so. But so now they've implemented. Now, here's the problem for me, right? Is that, so you connect the device, and you know that I kind of lock down my Windows machines because I don't want them updating when they're not supposed to. So you connect it. You have to enable Windows, not the updates. You don't scan. You have to enable at least the service. And then you cross your fingers, right? Because it somehow, you connects it. I don't know how it's triggering. How is that actually I don't know how it's triggering, right? But it knows. You could have a 7-year-old interface, and you plug it in, and it goes ping, and it somehow triggers, right? But it triggers Windows Update. And the problem that I've had with various clients is that it just then does a blanket update. And I've gone, well, I didn't want to do a blanket update. I just wanted the bloody driver for the Roland interface, right? So, this has been an ongoing thing for me for a couple of years now. And I've had discussions with Roland saying, give me the driver. Just give me the driver. You obviously have a bespoke driver for the device, right? Why don't you make it available? No, there isn't a bespoke driver. Well, there is, right? So this is very, very frustrating for me because I'm on tender hooks with these, right? So people are just going, don't worry about it, man. Just let it update. Well, no, I don't want to let it update because that could not only trigger a security update, could also trigger an upgrade, right, up to the next revision, and then I'm in a world of hurt, or I could be in a world of hurt. So all of that just to install a Roland device that they have a bespoke driver that they don't want to supply. I don't know, Pete. Help me out here. Throw me a bone.
So obviously there are ways to stop a lot of those, but you kind of have to know in advance. Like just plugging in a device is not really something where you would expect this to happen. But the intent for a lot of those is to have it work like the video cards do, right? There's a driver on Windows Update that's been verified, and when you start up your PC and you plug that video card in for the first time, it checks to, based on the device IDs and stuff, it goes and downloads the driver so you actually have like a working display, right?
Yeah, let me tell you, Pete, that doesn't happen here, mate.
Stop, we won't talk about that. But you can always go to the NVIDIA site and download something recent or different or sometimes a specific version or whatnot from
Correct.
them.
100%.
Right? It's not like you go there and they say, well, just plug it in and it works. So I would have expected Roland to do the same thing where they have that massive driver catalog. And really it goes back, like you can get drivers for ancient stuff in that list.
Yep.
I would have expected them to say, here's the preferred way for you to do it. But if you need to download it so you can install it on a disconnected machine or something else that's separate, or for whatever reason you can't do that, then here's the zip file or the exe or whatever is needed there.
Yeah.
So that's the intent. For whatever reason, I'm not sure why Roland did that. I haven't gotten a response back, but I'll ping them on it. So
yeah, very strange. I did try and get some sense out of the local guys, and they've just said, listen, there is no driver available. I've gone, there is, because if it was just a USB, what's the standard USB device? What do they call that?
A class driver, yeah.
If it's a class driver, you wouldn't even need an internet connection. You just go bang and it's up. So for me, the mystery was, where's it making the call? Right, and because the initial thing was that we didn't think it was in the Windows Update repository, and I'm thinking, well, where's it getting it from? Some magic server, the Roland Unicorn server hidden somewhere in the web. So now that you're telling me it is on the Windows Update repository, wouldn't it be just nice if it just downloaded that specific driver and didn't go trying to do everything else? But this is another discussion.
I plead the fifth on this.
Yeah, you're going to plead the fifth, right? So that's fine.
I will say one thing, Vince. So one of the things that does happen is sometimes you download a driver or something like that from that, and that has a dependency in it on something else, and then you get sort of a weird chain that brings you back. But I know that's not what's always happening.
Yeah. Well, look, the other thing, just going back very, very quickly with your graphics card example, I use NVIDIA graphics cards. Now, whether they're the RTX or whether the Quadras, I use the Quadras as default for the DAWs. But when I'm doing machines that have, maybe they're dabbling in some hybrid video editing as well, and we're using the RTXs, I have a very specific driver that I use the studio driver, for example, right? So I've got the studio driver, and then I can select exactly what components are being installed. Now, that's the same with the
Quadra. And you know how it performs and how it affects DPC latency and all that stuff.
So, and the same with the Quadra driver, right? Now, this isn't any, cloak and dagger, super secret type of information. People know that the RTX drivers, for example, have studio drivers. They are essentially Quadra drivers, right? They're optimized the same way that the Quadra drivers are. So that's perfect for us. If you do a blanket Windows update, and it updates the graphics driver, do you even get that option, Pete?
No, I think you get whatever.
You just get the OEM one.
Best.
And I bet you it forces...
Depends on what NVIDIA supplied is really what it is.
Yeah, and I bet you it forces a new driver model as well, which then creates a whole stack of problems as well. Or could, sorry.
Yeah.
Can. So I don't use the new driver models, if at all possible. And I'm very selective with any of those drivers. So that's
sure.
Yeah, that's something that
you're building PCs that you need to support for a very specific need. So you're going to want a specific known set of drivers for that. It makes total sense.
Yeah. So I think the Roland thing can be easily resolved. All they've got to do is where there's a download button to actually download the driver, it's more than just a PDF file that says, oh, by the way, just connect it and magically everything will work.
Yeah. So it used to be the driver.
It used to be.
Somebody just replaced all the files. Some intern probably got paid for a whole summer to go through and replace every single driver with a PDF.
Well, it's only the Windows 10 ones, I think. Yeah, the Windows 7 ones, you still actually get a driver. Anyway, moving on. And we're getting towards the tail end of this. NAMM. Now, you would this week be over in sunny California usually.
Yeah,
and,
I miss that.
Yeah, this year we've got virtual NAMM, and it was and I was discussing this with you last week when I was registering, which kind of hilarious when you're registering, for the virtual NAMM, which is kind of cool because I can actually contact some of the developers and the suppliers and stuff and ping them and see if I can get a virtual meeting, because I haven't been able to physically go to NAMM since year 2000. So I haven't been there for 2 decades, and so this was cool for me. And I'm registering, and it gets to the part about job description. Yeah, I sent you that screenshot, and I went,
right.
What is this? What were the 3 options? One was software.
It was basically software developer with like the 3 options.
That was it. There was 3 variants of the software developer.
Yeah, there was no like music store owner, no musician,
no integrator, no producer, nothing. And I've just gone, hey Pete, check this out.
It was really strange.
Yeah, so I just put down, I'm a software developer apparently.
Yeah. Hey, awesome. Welcome to the fold.
Well, thank you, man.
I should say that they've gone to great pains in some places to say this year's not virtual. We're all going to call it virtual NAMM, but it's not virtual NAMM. It's Believe in Music Week.
Yes. I did when I woke up very, very early this morning for this podcast, I saw the email sitting there.
Sorry, Ben.
Yes. We don't have to tell the listeners in that you didn't read your run sheet. But that's okay.
Yeah.
That's all right.
Yeah. So you got up 2 hours early for no reason. That's okay.
Oh, no. I made use of the 2 hours. It's okay. But that's okay. That's fine. I mean, we're in different time zones, man, so that's all well and good. So in the email, I had my invitation. Hey, welcome to, Believe in Music Week. I'm thinking to myself, what is this? I went, oh, yeah, hang on. It's the NAMM. So I've kind of
pretty lofty name.
Yeah, I've logged in. And it looks pretty cool. I haven't had a bit of a good look around yet. But look, I'll enjoy this week just kind of poking around and see if I can actually get to talk to anyone from any of
that will be interesting. And then there's lots of pre-recorded, like the MIDI organization put out I think 4 or 5 videos that explain things like what MIDI 2.0 is, what BLE MIDI is, and a bunch of other stuff that will be helpful for people. I tweeted those out on my own Twitter account, but I'm sure they'll show up in the session catalog too. Yeah.
Well, look, that was good because I did see that announcement about the whole MIDI 2 thing, and I'm looking at the picture. There was a photo of the committee, and I remember I sent it to you. I said, "Where are you?" And we couldn't even work out when the photo was taken.
I don't exactly remember, but I know like when I'm at NAMM on those Sundays. First of all, my attention span is about 30 minutes as it is,
right?
And so when you're in there for the 5th hour on Sunday, with meetings and stuff, like at some point I usually have to bail. Because I've had enough of sitting down behind a desk.
5 hours,
and I'm sure the photo was taken later than that.
Yeah, I don't know about 5 hours, Pete. All I can remember, I've been to a couple of NAMMs, and they were just they were very drink heavy, if I remember rightly. So we'd have our meetings during the day, usually hungover, and then we'd be hitting the the tequilas, what do they call them? The margaritas, right. And they look like fish bowls. They were that big,
Yeah.
We'd be consuming.
That's why you need to do the drinking on Saturday. So, because Sunday morning is usually somewhat quiet. You don't want to do it on Friday because Saturday morning in that hall, it's like the whole place turned into the drum hall.
Yeah. Well,
you don't want to be hungover for that.
But I'm trying to think. It starts earlier. It used to start earlier. It used to start like a Thursday, from what I remember. Well, Wednesday lets the press in.
Yep. And then Thursday, Friday, and Saturday, and then half of Sunday, I think, is what it is.
I think that's that was our kind of schedule. We used to land on the Thursday, maybe have a quick poke around, and then meetings Friday, Saturday, and then Sunday was let's just do one last round. Usually into the basement where it was all those weird. Remember the basement with all those really, the smaller developers, and so there used to be some really cool stuff. And then I used to just do the basement on the last day, and then we'd be flying out. So So now, look, it'd be interesting, and I'm looking forward to seeing what they've actually put together. And this could be an opportunity for me to touch base with a few people that I know from some of the developers and stuff.
I'm really hoping it works. Yeah, just tell them you're a software developer, right?
Well, they're going to be looking at me going, AAVIM technology, hang on, since when have you been a software developer? I said, well, when I signed up, because that was the only option, you know.
But let me know how the meetings and stuff go, because this is, I'm of two minds about virtual events, and obviously, like at Microsoft, we've had to change to all virtual lately too, and I do miss, even as an introvert, I miss being out and about and in front of crowds and things like that. But I'm curious to see how the NAMM experience is without that.
Well, let me just poke there, because I have no idea what the protocol, you know, what are they using? You know, they're using Zoom. I don't know. I have no idea. You know.
So we use Teams, and
that's what I was about to say.
Teams built specifically for events. Yeah.
Yep. And so, yeah, I've got to see, because the only thing with a camera that I've got is my laptop, and that's running on a Linux. which could be quite detrimental if these meetings are not running on some protocol thing that isn't running on Linux.
I think Zoom runs on a lot of things, so I don't know. I don't know what they're using, honestly.
Yeah. So again, I'm going to put my feelers out. Look, in the end, I could be, you know, there might be, these things might be already full. Who knows? You know, by the time I get to any of these guys, they could be completely booked out, because when you think about it,
yeah, the whole
all of a sudden you've got the whole world trying to sit there and get a meeting now, where before you actually had to physically be there. So if I get a meeting with any of the people that I know, then fine. If not, I'm not going to be overly stressed, because again, like I said, we're dealing with the whole people all trying to elbow their way in for a meeting, you know, and there's far more important people than me. So that'll be an interesting one. All right, I think, Pete, that might be probably a good point to put a pin in it for this show, unless there's something that you want to discuss.
No, I think it might be good in the next DAWbench you do after this to maybe talk about what the virtual experience at NAMM was like.
Yeah.
You know, I think that might be interesting to folks.
The next TechBytes. Yeah. Okay.
Or maybe, the next TechBytes would be better.
Yeah. All right. Cool. Not a problem. All right, then. Well, again, Pete, thank you for your time and energy. It's been awesome.
Thanks for having me.
Yeah, you're most welcome. We covered a whole stack of areas again. Thank you for everyone that's listened in and got this far. And let's just sign it off now. On to the next.